All right, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about narcissism victim syndrome, but what I'm going to do is talk about some of their behaviors and how their behaviors can traumatically impact you. So let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and jump in. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. For all of you who are subscribed and for those who are new, I encourage you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button right over here so that you can stick around with us and be a part of our growing and validating community. In case you don't know who I am, let me go ahead and briefly introduce myself. My name is Tamara, and I'm an internationally and board certified trauma therapist, but I'm also a licensed mental health therapist, and I practice within my own private practice in the area of trauma, emotional and psychological trauma. So I specialize in working with children, teens, and families, as well as adults. So let's go ahead and just jump in. So in the previous video, I kind of defined some of the things that you're likely to experience if you are experiencing a narcissism victim syndrome, okay? And here's the definition of that. And let me just highlight also as a disclaimer that narcissism victim syndrome is not a clinical diagnosis. Neither has it been scientifically recognized. But what it is it's a term that describes to mainstream society a series of behaviors that occurs when you are in a narcissistic relationship or you're in a relationship with a narcissistic abuser. Okay, so I want you to kind of see this term as just a practical definition of a narcissistic relationship that is abusive. Okay, it is not a clinical term. All right, so what I want to do in this video today, guys, is I want to highlight some of their MO, their modus operandi, and I also want to highlight how these particular relationships can traumatically impact you. So let's start with the characteristics of a narcissistic abuser. So the first thing that you're likely to see in a narcissistic abuser, and especially when they get upset and they feel like they need to manipulate and dominate you, is the silent treatment. The silent treatment is I don't even know how to describe it, guys. It's a very unnerving kind of tactic, I guess I can say, that they use. Narcissistic abusers know how to use and work silent treatment, and they do it to manipulate you. They know that we are human beings of communication. We need to be communicated with basically all throughout the day, right? In some fashion, whether that's nonverbal communication or verbal communication, body language, attitude, tone of voice, eye contact, lack of eye contact. We have to have some kind of communication, and we have to be plugged into the next human being. It helps us orient ourselves, and it helps us understand kind of where we are with the other person and where we are within our world. Without that communication, we feel really off. You know, and narcissists know that. So they utilize and manipulate the silent treatment just to get to you. All right, there's nothing more to say about that. They manipulate it, they use it, it's who they are. All right, the next thing, guys, that you're likely to see is gaslighting. And I know a lot of you are familiar with that term. Gaslighting is the idea that you bring a legitimate complaint to the person, and you know the person sees what's going on. There's no doubt about it. And you say, here you go, our marriage is falling apart. We're not communicating. We're not intimate anymore. We're not talking. What's going on? And your husband looks at you and says, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean we're not intimate anymore? We just had a deep conversation the other day, right? So they try to downplay and minimize the reality of the situation. That's gaslighting, okay? And it causes you to kind of walk away and second guess and look at yourself and really question if you're seeing reality for what it is. And gaslighting can really get to such an intense level that you begin to lose, is what I'm trying to say, your identity. You begin to lose your identity. You begin to lose a contact with your reality because you're now questioning, and they have a really good way that they cause you to question. Stonewalling is the next thing that a narcissistic abuser will utilize. That's completely shutting down and refusing to talk. That individual may either engage in selective hearing. They respond to what they hear or what they want to hear. They select what they want to hear, and they select whether or not they're going to respond. Selective mutism, they select an opportunity to talk, and they don't talk any other times. Okay, now let me clarify. Selective mutism is a clinical diagnosis, but that's not what I'm referring to when I utilize this term. Selective mutism means that they are selecting times when they refuse to talk to you. Okay, I'm just using it as a matter of fact metaphor, matter-of-fact thing. Okay, so I don't want you to think I'm talking about the clinical syndrome, but they select times when they're going to be quiet. They select times when they're going to talk to you. Very manipulative, so stonewalling, okay? Pathological lying is another thing. Pathological lying is the act of lying without a clear reason and a clear cause. There's actually no benefit to lying. And I'm going to put my video up here where I talk about pathological lying. And I talk about pathological lying in all of these videos, guys, because it's a thing that happens. Pathological liars are in our lives, and pathological lying as the act itself is something that happens as part of a bigger picture. So it's not a diagnosis or a clinical diagnosis in and of itself. Pathological lying is a symptom of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture may be narcissism, sociopathy, borderline personality disorder, codependency, attention seeking, juvenile delinquency. Like there's a whole series of behaviors and mindsets and mental illnesses that could include pathological lying, okay? But pathological lying is a symptom of narcissism. It may not occur in all narcissists, but it does occur in narcissism. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. But this is something that you're likely to see in them as well. Another thing is, narcissistic abusers really like to engage in a smear campaign. They like to take your good name and your reputation and smear it as good as they possibly can, right? They try that amongst your work partners, your colleagues. They try it in the neighborhood. They try it in the courtroom. They try it in newspapers and really highly exposed relationships like celebrity relationships or political relationships, right? The individual engages in a smear campaign. This is who they are. I want you to kind of think of narcissistic abusers as individuals who do not know how to fight fair. They don't know how to engage in a confrontation where there's a constructive end, right? The only reason they fight is because they feel inadequate and they need to gain the upper hand. So their fighting is never really fair. Keep that in mind, guys. Their fighting is never really fair. What they want from you is vulnerability, weakness. They want you to be beneath them. That's how they feel above. And so narcissistic abuse is always going to leave you feeling negative. As I talk about in my most recent video right up here, it's going to always leave you feeling shame and guilt and sad and inadequate and confused and perplexed, right? That's just how it is. It's going to always leave you feeling that way. All right, guys. So how does this impact your brain? Well, I have my notes here to kind of keep me on track. Let me explain to you how this affects your brain, okay? Now, I want you to understand that traumatic relationships impact the brain in two ways, all right? And I have it listed here. One is that you almost have an expectation of impending doom at all times, an expectation of impending doom. You're never able to enjoy the relationship because you know somewhere down the line, somewhere at some point, something is going to dissatisfy the narcissist or disrupt who you are in that relationship and who the both of you are in that relationship. It's never going to be smooth sailing. There's going to be a point at which that individual is going to be dissatisfied, whether it's your fault or not. You might also find yourself feeling that no matter what, you're always going to be blamed for something. So there's always this sense of impending doom. All right. So that is the traumatic impact of a narcissistic relationship or of narcissistic abuse. So that's one element. Another element is that you may begin to re-experience developmental trauma. So developmental trauma is basically childhood trauma. It's trauma that has happened over the course of your development. If you had an abusive mother, if you had an abusive father, if you experienced rape, child molestation, if you experienced physical abuse, if you experienced any kind of trauma as a child, as an adolescent, as a young adult, that developmental trauma is likely to be re-experienced when that narcissistic abuser targets you. Okay, so they target you in such a way that your mind begins to relive your previous trauma. So that's another way that it impacts you. Another thing, and this is something I haven't talked about on this channel, is neuro-plasticity. Neuro-plasticity, all right? And here's the definition right up here on the screen for you guys, all right? Neuro-plasticity is basically the brain's lasting changes. It's when neural networks in the brain change in response to trauma, damage, genes, environmental influences. Okay, so let's think of neuroplasticity as resilience, the brain's ability to bounce back from trauma. Okay, or you can also look at neuroplasticity as the brain's inability to stand up under a lot of damage and pressure. Okay, so what happens in the process of neuroplasticity, or what happens in the process of neuronal development, is neurons are creating connections in the brain. And those connections help neurons communicate with each other effectively so that you can think, so that you can process, so that you can function in daily life. That's the best way to put this without getting too scientific, you know? But neuroplasticity is really the brain's ability to change in response to things. And sometimes if you are in a traumatic relationship, your brain is not able to connect and make those connections with different neurons in the brain because something is happening to your brain neurologically, and that is trauma. And trauma has a physiological impact on the brain through chemical processes and through structures in the brain. You know, there's two important structures in the brain that trauma impacts, although it impacts quite a few structures, but the most prominent would be the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. That's where you process emotional memories. And the limbic system, that's another piece. But also we have executive functioning, which is in the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is a part of the brain, or the prefrontal lobes, you can call them. All right, let me put a picture up here on the screen for you as well so you can follow me. But the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes really is a part of the brain that helps us manage our decision making. It is part of our personality development as well. And it also helps us with our impulse control. When we have damage to the prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning and higher order thinking is reduced or decreased. And so it's really difficult for us to function at our highest level of functionality. All right. And even with the limbic system and the amygdala as well, the emotional centers of the brain. So these are three things that can happen, guys. Let's see. What did I mention here? So traumatic relationships impact the brain in three ways. Two important ways though, but I added neuroplasticity, but two important ways I'm going to say, which is expectation of impending doom at all times, even when the brain doesn't need to be fearful, it is. And the other piece of that is re-experiencing developmental trauma. So going back to the past and reliving your trauma. And then of course neuroplasticity, not being able to make those neuronal connections so that you can function and your brain can function at its peak level. So these are ways that a narcissistic and abusive relationship can have on your brain and on your ability to function. And you know, it's something that can be healed. You can definitely bounce back from the traumatic relationship, but it can take some time. And it can also feel like you're being pushed back 20 steps when really you're just trotting or treading through the process of healing. I talk about post-traumatic growth right up here in this video. It's a previous video that I've done, and I explain to you the process of post-traumatic growth. Thank you so much, guys, for being with me in today's video. I encourage you to go ahead and give it a thumbs up if this was helpful to you, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well so you can stick around. Make sure you hit that bell button so you can know when I post videos and when I post articles and blog posts in the comments section. So next video, I'm going to teach you how to narrow down the narcissistic abuser's modus operandi. So stick around for that video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.